Welcome to Gender Wars. We're outside.
It's Easter.
It's Easter, and we're outside for a very special edition of Shannon and Melanie Have a Conversation.
We're trying a 3-camera setup for the first time. We've been talking about it for a while, upping our game a little bit and trying out different production techniques. We decided that we'd find a place in a park today to chat a little bit about what's going on, and this is the first Gender Wars report we've done in person. Is it not?
I think it might be. Yeah.
I've
done one. I've done interviews in person. Well, I've done one interview in person, but yeah, first time we actually have a Gender Wars outside.
So normally I'm phoning it in from Ottawa, and you're here in Markham, and it happens that Melanie lives close to a family of mine, and we have a little block of time on Saturday afternoon of the Easter weekend to get together to record our weekly Gender Wars report. We say it every week.
It's been a busy week in
Gender. It's been a busy week in Gender Wars in Canada, right?
Yeah.
So we had some action in Duncan, BC after yet another thing that doesn't happen is happening again, where a male-bodied person, I'm not even sure if they were trans.
Well, that's going to be the argument from the trans activists, but a male-bodied person with a beard has presented themselves in the female spaces, and there's been some uproar.
Yeah, and there was some kids there, so there was a protest. We'll touch on that a little bit. There was a really, really powerful podcast with Michael Schellenberger on Jordan Peterson's podcast this week to talk about the WPATH files. There was a big announcement from the French Senate in the last 10 days or 2 weeks in France. There was... I had a chance to do a delegation at the Ottawa Carleton District School Board this week, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that tomorrow.
Tomorrow's Easter.
It's Easter. What else is it?
Tomorrow is a Trans Day of Visibility.
It just happens that because Easter changes every year, it just happens that this to fall tomorrow. But there's some news from an Alberta church that we're going to talk about. And we've got some other Alberta characters. Tegan and Sarah, the twin pop stars, have made some statements about inclusion in Alberta, getting political at the Junos. And what else do we have?
Can't even read your handwriting.
Where do you want to start? You want to go west coast to east or east coast to west?
I don't know. I think I would like you to tell me a little bit about Duncan, BC. That's what I would like to hear about.
Yeah, so a friend of the show, where the heck did his name go?
Scott
Gieler.
Scott Gieler.
Scott lives in Nanaimo, which is 35 minutes north of Cowichan, BC, Duncan. And there's been some stuff there. About a year ago, I reported, thanks to Scott's help, that there had been a man. We found out after the fact that the man was a convicted and registered sex offender from the BC Interior, gone into the Nanaimo Aquatic Center, created some...
that was from him?
Some discomfort. Yeah, Scott connected me to that story. And then there was another guy... I don't remember his name, a rather portly fellow who was complaining about getting into...
Oh, with the red hair.
Yeah.
About not being able to go to the single-sex gyms.
That's right, yeah. And there's been a couple of other incidents on Vancouver Island along that corridor between Parksville, north of Nanaimo, and Duncan. And there was a protest. Because this not just a male-bodied person, this guy looked like a hippie with a full hippie beard, and he was in the change room with his wife, and he was parading around naked in the women's change room. And from what I understand, he invoked the queerness eligibility and human rights to be there. I talked to Scott this week, and there were a couple of Indigenous kids, girls in this change room at the time, and here we have a man with his equipment out, and it didn't go over very well. There was two things that were interesting about this, besides the thing that doesn't happening again, and one was that the BC Flying Squad Against Transphobia issued a statement, quite a frightened one, actually. They said,
wait, let's just say what that is. So during the Million Marches, or right before the Million Marches, the unions came out and had this leak. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this leak, but in the leak, if you remember, they were talking about having these flying squads, which are basically these groups of people who are ready to mobilize at any time, given a phone call to go in a particular place. And so these unions have these flying squads, right? So if you have an issue, you call into these flying squads and they will be right there for you en masse, on site, to counter protest or whatever it is that they want to do, right?
Yeah. So the communities were mobilizing people from Victoria through Nanaimo to rally in Duncan. They planned it for this week to protest against this incursion into safe spaces for women and girls. And the BC Flying Squad Against Transphobia issued a statement. Sad news, kin. I'm going to come back to this because Melanie's got some insights into that greeting. Extreme agitators, affiliated white supremacist cells, and significant physical risk of safety meant that the Flying Squad Against Transphobia decided not to go to the Duncan, BC protest to counter-protest against sane people trying to protect women and girls.
Yeah.
Tell us about kin. What does that mean?
Well, I was listening to a queer Marxist educational meeting that they post online. Because often when you have these presentations, these academic presentations, they post them online. Anyway, so in there, they clearly described what I've been trying to tell everybody. Everything comes down to this obsessive idea of capitalism. But anyway, kin seems to me like it just means comrade. It's just like a queer greeting. So instead of say comrade, it's kin, right? Because the whole idea is to, without going into too much detail right here, but it's like the abolishing of the nuclear family for chosen family. So kin is chosen family. It's the queer greeting for
Right.
comrade for chosen family.
It triggers in me something, what did you say it was once? Alternative modes of kinship?
That's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so these people all got scared and didn't show up. And they promised, of course, that they're going to come out the next time. Megan Murphy and a couple of others, Kellyanne Peary.
Yeah.
Kelly Peary.
Kelly. Yes. Sorry, Kelly.
Kelly's also going to be speaking at that event. There's a panel. I believe it's in Victoria coming up in May. We'll put more information about that if you're on Vancouver Island or even from the mainland and you want to go over and see Megan Murphy. She'll be doing a part of a panel there again. I think Vancouver Island is home turf for her, pun intended. Michael Schellenberger and Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, I
week.
had to listen to that yesterday, sort of on and off. Seems that Mia Hughes and Michael Schellenberger are taking different media.
Yeah, they've kind
or
of
talking to different-
split duties.
Right.
Yeah.
Schellenberger obviously went to speak to Jordan Peterson, which was interesting.
That was one of the most profound analysis of the psychology of transgenderism and of this medicalization process that I've heard. Where it's coming from, how it formulates, the whole AGP autogonophile narrative of men wanting to be women and then extending that belief about the world that people can change sex to justify the transition of children.
Well, I can talk about that a little bit because, again, I'm seeing this in the literature. So when I talk about the literature, I'm talking about the queer pedagogy. I'm talking about early education, or early childhood education academics writing about this concept. And so the idea is generally because, and this let me take a step back. So the idea generally is because there are queer adults, and I'll use queer because it's an umbrella term for all this trans stuff really, but because there are queer adults in the world, or trans adults or whatever, or even gay adults, that presupposes that there was always, those people were children.
Right.
And so because they were once children, so the trans child or the queer child must exist. But fundamentally, that's the AGP argument, because to justify the fact that you're AGP, that you're trans, you have to sort of justify that there are trans children too. So these two things are kind of part of the same idea. They formulate the same ideas for different purposes, but you see that in the academics on queer pedagogy all the time.
Yeah.
So heteronormativity is reproduced by society, a liberal society, or capitalist society and has to be disrupted because queer children exist, and whilst heteronormativity is just assumed, that these queer children cannot grow up to be their true authentic selves. And so yeah, that's kind of the argument with that, really.
So,
but it definitely comes from the AGP, the grown AGP man, which must justify his existence by he was always a trans child.
Yeah. And meaning it's almost like saving these trans kids from having to grow up normal.
I guess so. I don't think that's really where they're coming from on that.
The discussion between Schellenberger and Peterson was fascinating to me for a bunch of reasons, because they went into the motivation of the autogonophile, and to be seen as a fantasy, or to have their fantasy be seen as reality and have other people participate in it. And Jordan Peterson's been talking about this dark tetrad phenomena for a long time, and I think most people realize he's a psychologist. He's one of the most widely cited academic psychologists in the world. And he was talking a little bit about how these different really pathological personality types, the sociopath, the narcissist, the borderline, the sadist, all are acting out their kind of different roles around this mass psychosis, or this mass movement that is transgenderism.
Well, just being trans, so AGP specifically, right? The idea of, so AGP being autogynephilia, and it's the idea of being in love with yourself, but as a woman, right?
Yeah.
So the love of yourself as a woman. But the story of Narcissus is that he saw his reflection in a lake or a river, and he fell in love with it. It's literally the story of Narcissus, but a heterosexual male falls in love with the female version of himself.
It's a fascinating myth, that kind of an area of interest for me. Narcissus was said to be an extraordinarily attractive young man, and all the women chased after him, but he wanted nothing to do with them, and he fell in love with his own reflection. And the gods took pity on him, one of the gods anyway, and turned him into I think it was a water lily, or some sort of flower that kind of hangs over the water and always reflects on the water.
Well, that's AGP, in it.
Indeed. Yeah. So there's a very, very high correlation with narcissism and autogynephilia. And that conversation between those two men was really mind-blowing for me. That, and for a bunch of reasons. And you mentioned earlier when we were preparing for our segment that, I said I felt a little bit sad for Mia, who's a friend of ours, that she wasn't on Jordan Peterson. And you made a good observation that, there's the TERFs and the GenSpect people and that whole Megan Murphy crowd,
There are tensions
the
between,
feminists.
there are tensions.
And so it seems to be very effective that these groups are dividing up the task of delivering the message to the different groups, while avoiding the controversy. So it's a nice way of kind of fragmenting the messaging a little bit and reaching the multiple audiences. Speaking of reaching audiences, Chanel Fald and I did a delegation to the OCDSB on Tuesday night, and it wasn't gender related. It was more diversity, equity, and inclusion, and equity related. We got some information onto the record, and I've been thinking a lot about this for the last couple of weeks, because there's major things happening around the world. My intention with going to delegate to the school board was to get a couple of studies about DEI and their lack of effectiveness onto the record. A point in time to be able to point back to it and say, I told you so. And we are now in a position, early in the segment we talked about the Senate in France making an announcement after research and examining the systematic reviews done by other countries, and the Senate saying that this is perhaps the worst medical scandal in history, and that they are putting the brakes on the puberty blockers and all the interventions in the country of France. This is snowballing very, very rapidly. We know that Germany unexpectedly joined this conversation in December and early this year. We had the ending of puberty blockers in the UK a couple of weeks ago. A lot is happening. And in Canada, Danielle Smith is leading the way, as we know, in Alberta with prohibiting these interventions for children under 16.
Who else in the world is going after the medicalization?
We've got the UK really making big strides, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland. the Netherlands, I mentioned before. So we have an opportunity across the country, and delegating to school boards is a really, it's actually quite a simple thing to do. To get these things onto the record, I'm going to compile a list of the kind of the really big news in the recent 6 weeks or so. One of the school board trustees reached out to me after I delegated. I spoke to her on Thursday.
Really?
Yeah, Donna Blackburn. Huh. Donna's, she's open-minded. She's
because I'll tell you what, there's one thing I noticed. Both you and Chanel did a delegation, and it was from 4 minutes, which wasn't long, to 2 minutes.
Yep.
And it was very sharp, very to the point. And then afterwards, it was, are there any questions? Well, of course there were no questions on this at all. Same with Chanel. But then I continued watching the other delegations, and they all had questions. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Lots of them did, and lots of them got another 5 minutes to talk after their 2 minutes.
Yeah.
So the school boards don't actually want to hear, but this act of going and delegating, and even applying to delegate and keeping record of it, and giving the whatever administrator the information that you're going to share is an act of putting it on the record. And we really need to do that with our members of parliament, our members of provincial parliament, MLAs.
Well, because they can't say that they didn't know.
Exactly.
And
we're at the point now where getting it on the record and being able to hold these groups accountable is going to force them to take action. Now, the school boards don't want to change their diversity policies. They don't want to, acknowledge that these inclusion behaviors, this queer pedagogy in school, the trans affirmation that's happening all across the country. SOGI is the other big one out in the West. We have the ongoing drama with Annie Ohana. And the BC Teachers Federation put up a post a couple of days ago saying that they were decrying the bullying and the mobbing and the intimidation.
There's no space
of
for
good
hate
teachers.
in schools.
And of course they didn't allow any comments, but these groups are now. We need a systematic process, and we need to engage people in getting on the record where we are at this moment, so that we can hold those groups accountable.
But hang on, Shannon, what is it that we're getting on the record?
Well, that we've got major sovereign nations like France, the UK, Norway, like we've got those policy changes. We've also got the WPATH files that have been exposed.
Because I guess what I'm trying to get at is there's lots of different things that could be put or recorded, right? And so I think what you're talking about is getting on the record the idea that science or the consensus in the scientific community is maybe not what's being presented.
Exactly.
So there's that.
Yep.
So appealing to the rational person. But you have to, I'm just going to point out that schools, that's not the position they're taking. And from my understanding of my own reading into this, is that this is coming from an ideological position. And so there's another thing that can be done, and that's trying to show the ideological bias in a particular direction. So DEI is presented as diversity, equity, inclusion, which is this everybody equality, we all want to treat people well, and so on and so forth. But the other thing to show is that this is actually having the opposite effect, and what it's actually supporting is far left revolutionary ideology, right? So I think I just wanted to kind of slot that in, really.
Yeah.
Because there's different things to get on the record, and I think it's really important if you're going to do that you have an idea of what it is that you want to show. Because no, the school boards, they're probably not going to listen. But if you keep delegating on a particular topic, you want to show something, then I think that needs a little bit of clever thinking.
Yeah. Well, what I'm going to do, and I've done this before with other school boards, but for my own this time, I'm going to write a letter to all the trustees and the director of education. I'm going to itemize those things, and I'm going to say you need to be aware of this, and I'm going to see if I can get some collaborators from Ottawa to make the petition to delegate on those specific subjects. It gives us the ability to be on the record.
It's building a case.
Yeah, and I'll publish that on my Substack, and we can make it accessible. So if you want to take that content and use the same thing, then we can
build on each other.
Yeah, the company I used to work for, we called that R&D. It's rob and duplicate.
There you go.
Yeah.
I just like calling it collaborating with others, standing on the shoulders of giants.
Well,
what's next? What have we got on your sheet?
Trans Day of Visibility is tomorrow.
Didn't we just talk about Trans Day of Visibility?
I can't remember if it was before or after the.
Is that the thing? Is there's not really that much.
Rolling.
There's not that much to talk about with Trans Day of Visibility. It's a day, and they want to be visible. I mean, if you want to be facetious, we could link that to narcissism, because it's literally a day about looking at yourself because you're trans.
Yeah. Joe Biden made a statement about this. It happens to fall on the 31st, which is Easter. There was some outrage in I don't know what's going on in the Christian Twitter world or Christian X world in the last week.
Was it Christ is King? There's some
I don't understand
kerfuffle
that
about
whole
that.
thing.
I don't know.
But the Trans Day of Visibility falls on Easter Sunday this year, and along the I guess the efforts to support and be inclusive, the Unitarian Church in Calgary is having a drag queen.
They're having a drag queen story hour
for Easter service.
Yeah.
Yeah. I grew up in a Christian church. I'm here with my family, and we're going to church tomorrow for Easter, as is custom. I'm that person now, Christmas and Easter.
Well.
And I refreshing my nieces and nephews on the story of the crucifixion and resurrection and why this is important. And now these churches have been captured and queered, I guess. And
well, have they though? I mean, yes, they've been captured. Yes, but I'm going to say something that's going to be controversial to some people. But I'm not convinced that Drag Queen Story Hour. I used to be convinced that Drag Queen Story Hour was about sexualizing children. I'm not convinced that's really kind of the goal anymore. And I think I've come to understand it as gender is a performance, right?
Right.
And so the idea of introducing this, it's living queerly. So introduction to queer modes of living, and queer modes of living just means the gender that you can take it on, you can put it off, you can take it on, take it off, exchange it whenever you like. All these fancy colors just introduce children to this idea that gender is disposable, basically.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know which is more insidious.
Well, it's the abolition of the gender binary stuff. That's kind of where it's coming from. Now, why a church would want to do that, I don't know. But someone's told me that are they the Unitarian Church?
Yeah.
Someone explained to me, who knows more about religion than I do, is that they are the church of inclusion, of LGBT
Yeah,
inclusion.
they've always been hyper liberal.
So they're going to have some queer politics in there, and so I think that's kind of where that's coming from, really.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's all very complicated. I'm not really a religious person, but
they were. I worked close to the Unitarian Church in Ottawa 25 years ago. Back when I was finishing out my restaurant serving career and getting a start in life, and the church members used to come over after service every Sunday, and so they were the church that was very progressive on gay marriage in Canada, a lot of LGBT in the community, a lot of very open-minded people, moving away from the very dogmatic Christianity into a much more open idea of church and community.
Because look, you do get Christian or religious socialists, because ultimately that's what it is, just socialism. But what was it, Jim Jones?
Right.
The cult leader,
Yep.
who had a socialist commune with socialist Christian ideas, because Christianity can kind of lend itself to like collectivist ideas.
Well, I've seen the meme a couple of times in the last few days that Jesus was a socialist.
Yeah, I think that's not been uncommon, and the reason I also say that is because Peter McLaren, he got really upset at the video I made of him. He kept commenting, and one of those comments was, "Well, I'm a Catholic, so like what you're saying can't be true." But we've seen this over and over, that religion and socialism are not necessarily distinct from one another. Like there's certainly been efforts by some to accept one as part of the other, and so I know a lot of Christians right now think it's all about destroying the church, but I'm not sure that that's necessary. I think they want to take over the church.
The Catholics had some unholy marriage with the Nazis during the Second World War, and my Jewish friends have told me that there were a lot of Jews in that period of time that were very much on board with communism, because it was so much about this. Well, equity wasn't the word they used at the time, but supposed to be about kindness and
inclusion,
inclusion, and making everybody the same. The problem is it doesn't work in human societies, because we naturally work ourselves in and around hierarchies, and it's just a question of which hierarchy are we going to be.
Well, all that to say, just that there are parallels there, that the whole queer Marxism or DEI is not necessarily about destroying the church, even though for some it might be. I just think there's some nuance, I think, in that argument that can be made.
Yeah.
What else do we have on our sheet?
Tegan and Sarah, the Juno Awards.
Oh, yeah.
They were in, I think they were in Halifax. They're definitely in the Maritimes.
I was vaguely aware of Tegan and Sarah before, but I mean vaguely. I understand that they're singers.
Yeah, they had the identical twins from Calgary. They had a couple of pop hits, I don't know, a decade or more ago. They've been around for a while. And they gave a speech at the Junos, which is the Canadian Music Awards, kind of like the Grammys, and condemned Alberta's Premier Daniel Smith for these new policies, talking about trans kids and the usual rhetoric.
Well, it's the
basically.
erasure of the trans child.
Yeah. Now, both Tegan and Sarah, from what I understand, are gay. They're identically homosexual, and they've been very active for.
They're identically homosexual. We need to bring back the word homosexual.
Well, they say that the story with gays and lesbians has for decades been, and I've seen a few gay people recently talk and openly question this about being born gay, and the whole nature and nurture debate. We as a society generally accept that there's a biological component to homosexuality, and there's some.
But whether you're born gay or not, I think it's pretty clear that there's a orientation there that cannot be helped. But I think you're talking about whether someone is actually truly born gay or not.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that question, but
no, I don't think
in twin studies it would seem that if both twins are.
Yeah, that's a curious question that's worth looking into, because I find that curious and interesting research into that, which is obviously very taboo, and so people are not really willing to go down that road too much. But that is distinct from having an orientation. So I think that can't be helped really, like especially for men. Like they like what they like, and you can't really change that. And that was the whole argument with conversion therapy, isn't it? Is that you can't actually change someone's orientation once that's set in. Yeah. Which is different. But the argument of born that way needed to happen to allow people to stop trying to convert other people. Yeah. But that's a whole other conversation.
Well, I mean, we talked a bit about that, because that's one of the things that piqued both you and I. That was one of those like head scratching things about the trans identity. Yeah. Because the trans activists are trying to say, and have been for some time, that you were born trans.
Well, they say that you're conceived trans, actually, at the minute. Okay. I've heard that argument.
Yeah.
Trans zygotes.
I can't wrap my head around that. Anyhow, Tegan and Sarah have been activists for equal rights for LGBTQ for decades now. And honestly, they deserve some recognition and, kudos to the work that they've done in raising awareness. They were early.
Yeah, because look, homophobia has been a thing and unfair to people for a really long time. Let's be fair.
Unfortunately, what I hear from the LGBT community, especially the Generation X set, who I mostly know, they are saying that the younger generation of lesbians and gay,
the normative gays,
they're very much captured by this trans thing.
Yes.
And they've bought into that whole narrative, so we can.
Well, those are the queer gays.
Right. You're confusing me again.
Well, because you're talking about so normativity, right? Which is this big topical thing. We hear about heteronormativity all the time, but maybe people haven't heard of homonormativity. So normativity is the key word. Right. Normativity means normal, which is what they're trying to push against with the TQI. All the pluses in there. And so LGB, I think what you're talking about is normative. And so normative being that it is possibly monogamous or more leaning towards monogamy, stable relationships, normal in that way, traditional. But the queer is the opposite of normative, right? So they'll be the ones that are pushing this agenda forward. But that's different. So queer is an ideology. It's not necessarily how you're born or anything like that. It's about undoing all of that normativity. That's why you will have many trans, queer, or even LGBT anti-normative people or queer individuals attacking regular gay people. You have a lot of a rise in homophobia, not necessarily coming from the Christian right, although I'm sure there is some there, but coming from other gay people. And
Yeah.
that's the attack. That's the homophobic attack, because it's more down to normativity than it is about being gay. Those are two very different
We want
concepts.
to get rid of the normal.
Get rid of the normal. So it really doesn't. That's why you can be a queer person that is completely heterosexual, but queer is really down to that normativity stuff, right? Anyway, I'm not explaining this very well, but
Back to Tegan and Sarah.
back to Tegan and Sarah.
In their campaign in the U.S. for legalizing same-sex marriage, they teamed up with a company called Cool House, an ice cream maker, to come up with an ice cream sandwich called Till Death Do Us Part. And it was 2 slices of chocolate wafer with a salted caramel.
Oh, it sounds
in the
lovely,
middle.
actually.
It does sound delicious. Ellen Page followed them at the Junos.
Ellen looks sad.
Yeah.
Gave a little speech.
Ellen now, of course, goes by Elliot. Has had multiple surgeries and hormone interventions. She was one of the most adorable Canadian actresses in a long, long time. Anyhow, followed up Tegan and Sarah with more political condemnation of attacks against the transgender child. As we were talking, and we're kind of at the end of our list here, Rowan Jete Knox popped into my mind.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, there was that video that surfaced this week of Amanda Jete Knox, who was my child.
Is it Amanda Knox? Because isn't Amanda Knox the lady who killed someone in Italy?
Yes, so Amanda Jete Knox had to
is that why there's a Jete Knox?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So Amanda Jete Knox was my daughter's daycare provider. I've known her and Mark, who now goes by Zoe and has for some time, for almost 20 years. They were... Amanda got some of her, let's say, her initial fame on early Twitter as a mommy blogger, and her husband came out as, actually didn't know what was going on when it was happening. We had ceased crossing in social circles. I thought actually Amanda had become a lesbian and got together with someone called Zoe, but it turns out that Zoe was Mark, who I also knew, which was very confusing for me at the time. And then the Knoxes transed their son and put him on puberty blockers. And along the way, Jete wrote a book called Love Lives Here about this experience of inclusion in her household. Lives in a
polycule.
Polycule.
That is queer. That's the queer I'm talking about. That is the rejection of the normative.
Yeah. Over the years, Amanda Jete Knox has done presentations in elementary schools and high schools. OCDSB seemed to have a great thing for her to allow her to talk about this diversity in her life. And she decided that she was a trans man last year and started hormones and put up a video. Last summer, she was putting up videos that she was afraid that she was going to be murdered. It seemed like she was going through a paranoid streak. And now she's putting up videos after a few months on testosterone. And I don't know if that's testosterone has gone that fast to her voice, but she seems to be talking a lot deeper.
She seems to be putting on a bit too, though.
And she's having trouble with all of the women that are attracted to her because she's so manly at this point.
It's a stud. Gotta fight off them women. But apparently testosterone does have that effect on women about seriously increasing the sex drive, right?
Right.
I mean, that delusion could be some narcissism.
She's not throwing
in
off
there.
weird pheromones or anything. And
I mean, it's probably less likely that there are women throwing themselves at her, and that there's a fantasy of women throwing themselves at her because her sex drive has gone through the roof. Probably a more likely assessment of that situation.
Yeah.
But have you noticed this too, though? I think the same thing happened with Elliot Page or Ellen Page, whatever, where they transition to, I guess, embody maleness, and then talk about how much like Mac Daddy they are, about having to fight off women, or like suddenly becoming these like players of some kind. Like I've seen that.
It's weird to say.
It's like embodying this male stereotype of the player.
Yeah, I never found Amanda attractive particularly, but she's more attractive now
As a man?
As a man. that anyway, I don't know.
Why does that even matter?
I don't think it means anything.
You checking out the trans men?
We live in a strange world. It's Easter weekend.
Some may call it queer.
We're first time live from location together, shooting the weekly Canadian Gender Wars Report. Be sure to tune in again next week. I'm sure there's going to be all kinds of crazy coming up again. And stay tuned and follow, because as I said, I'm going to put out that list of benchmarks that I'm going to be sharing with school trustees and with politicians so that we can mark that moment in time. Any closing remarks, Melanie?
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter,
Have a great
everybody.
weekend, everybody.